During the past 40 years, through a series of computer simulations, modern astronomy and physics have found that the universe is finally calibrated. That means if you were to take any fundamental constant of nature and change it, even slightly, the result would be the creation of a sterile universe, devoid of atoms, molecules, stars, galaxies, and life. Some religious people argue that since these basic constants have to be precisely tuned in order to render the whole cosmos favorable to life, that entails the existence of a tuner, a watchmaker, a god.
The fundamental constants of the universe, of physics, are too good to be true. They're fine-tuned. If they were a tiny bit different, the universe wouldn't have the properties it does, and stars wouldn't have come into existence. If the gravitational constant was wrong, etc., we wouldn't be here. And some physicists invoke God to explain the fine-tuning of the universe.
This is, to me, the great God of the gaps.
Right.
That is, what is called the Anthropic Principle is what we're talking about. Right. What we do as scientists, we observe that the universe is made in this way. And if we changed any one of a series of 20 constants, you know, the Planck constant, the velocity of light, the mass of the proton, the mass, if we changed any one of those by a little amount, we wouldn't be here. And that's scientifically acceptable. It's a scientific observation that does not yet have a scientific answer. But to bring in God to explain this, to me, is the great God of the gaps. Because first of all, why do you bring in God? This is a scientific issue. Okay? God has no place in trying to resolve this. If God did not design it, who did? And the answer scientifically, of course, is nobody. Nature, if you want.
It sounds as though you don't want to use any kind of scientific argument which smells of gaps. That you don't want to have anything to do with that.
I agree thoroughly.
And I suppose my position would be that historically the evidence for the existence of God or gods was always almost exactly what you're now rejecting. I mean, people looked around them, they saw the universe, they saw life, and they thought there had to be a designer. And many people still do that, and you've rightly said why they're wrong. Historically, that's the way it was. To me, that had the effect of what I call raising my consciousness as to the power of science to explain how big, complicated things that seem to require a special explanation, can actually happen by simple means from simple beginnings. It makes God seem increasingly superfluous. It makes me feel, what's the point of believing in God at all?
I will accept, in the way in which you presented it, the God in whom I believe is superfluous. That is, I do not need God. That the God in whom I believe is a God who gave himself superfluously, whether I needed him or not, that in my religious tradition, in my firm, deep down within me belief, God gave himself to me. And he gave himself. It's his love for me. I will accept that it's superfluous in the sense that, contrary to what many Catholics do, they look to God as a source of explanation. God is not a God of explanation, primarily. He's a God of love. And consequently, I would accept that God is superfluous if I'm looking for a God to explain things. I don't need God. In fact, if God is a God of need, it's not God, because he transcends our needs.
I have said that evolution in my personal history, and you've stressed personal history, in my personal history it was my understanding of evolution that led me to atheism, because of that consciousness-raising thing I mentioned earlier.
If I were seeking for a God of explanation for evolution, I'd probably be an atheist, because I can perfectly well explain all that I know so far, and I hope into the future to explain it with science. So if all I'm looking for is explanation, I'd be driven to atheism. I agree.
Well, we're very similar, because of course I was looking for, when I believed in God, it was precisely a God of explanation that I was looking for. And so when I realized that he wasn't an explanation, I lost my faith in him. And so we're left with your faith coming from your tradition, from your family upbringing, which sounds to me pretty weak, actually.
Oh, I don't pretend it's strong. It's strong for me, but I can't give it a firm, completely rational explanation, or it wouldn't be faith. This is religious faith, Richard. And I can't pretend that I can prove it to anyone, because if I did, it would not be religious faith.